In celebration of Wellness Week, today's conversation will be about the important topic of mental health and wellness in the legal profession. Before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping matters to mention. First, attendees will be muted so we can avoid background noise and feedback during the program. That being said, attendees are encouraged to leave their cameras on so the speaker can engage with the audience. Today's conversation will begin with an introduction of our guest speaker. Our speaker will then kick off our discussion. She has some information she will be sharing, and that will be followed by a moderated question and answer session. We would love for today's discussion to be interactive. So attendees are encouraged to participate by posting questions in the chat or by using the raising your hand feature down at the bottom of your screen. I will be monitoring both the chat box and the raising hand feature, and I'll call on people as they indicate that they would like to speak. Finally, closed captioning is available by selecting the CC box in the lower left-hand corner of the page. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's guest speaker, Mandi Clay. Mandi is the managing attorney of 313 Law, PLLC, and she is a certified circuit court mediator, a Florida Supreme Court qualified arbitrator, and a licensed real estate agent. After clerking for 2 federal judges and working for over 10 years as a commercial litigator, she has broad litigation experience and provides freelance support to solo and small firms across the country. Mandi is also the past president of the Hillsborough Association for Women Lawyers, and she is an active member of 2 Florida Bar committees, including the Voluntary Bar Liaison Committee and the Standing Committee on Mental Health and Wellness of Florida Lawyers. Mandi is a support group facilitator with the Pasco County affiliate of the National Alliance on Mental Health, and she often speaks publicly about mental illness and the struggles it presents to those who live with it. Her interest in mental health issues is born of personal experience, having survived suicide in 1998 and suffered from depression and panic disorder for almost 30 years. She is thrilled to have the opportunity to share what she's learned with other attorneys and law students through her voluntary bar work. Please join me in welcoming today's guest speaker, Mandi Clay.
Thank you, Amy. It's a pleasure to be here talking to everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I have taught employment law at Cooley a couple of years, so I have some experience with Cooley students, and I always love to come and speak to you and have these kinds of discussions with you. I've done it a few times before, and so as Amy said, if you have any questions during this, please, put them in chat or raise your hand. I'm happy to talk about whatever it is that you want me to talk more about. The reason we talk about mental health when it comes to the legal profession is that we're one of the professions in this country that has a higher level of mental health issues than the population at large. So there are the top 3 professions that sort of have this dishonorable mention amongst our country are lawyers, dentists, and veterinarians. People are often surprised by the veterinarian one. I think a lot of that has to do with having to say goodbye to so many pets and watch their owners have to say goodbye. It's, a lot of it comes from sort of like an empathy fatigue, which I think a lot of lawyers suffer from as well. And so that is something that we talk about a lot in the legal profession, is, how to deal with the fact that a lot of times your clients come to you at the most difficult time in their life, and you have to sort of guide them through that without letting it drain you emotionally. So I started talking about mental health in the legal profession probably about 5 or 6 years ago now, when the Florida Bar started having its own town hall meetings across Florida. So the Florida Bar president and Dory Foster Morales, who would later become the Florida Bar president, were going across Florida and having these town hall meetings with lawyers in various cities about mental health issues. And I went to one in St. Pete, and it was a fantastic presentation. And they were talking about the higher suicide rates and depression rates amongst the legal profession. And so lawyers in general are twice as likely as the general population to commit suicide. We are 3.6 times more likely to suffer from severe depression, and our alcoholism rate is double that for the general population. So, these are the issues that they would sort of talk about. And one of the presenters mentioned during that first town hall that they couldn't imagine what it felt like to think that you had no other choice than to end your life. And so at that point, I raised my hand and stood up and said, well, I do know how that feels because, as Amy mentioned, I'm a suicide survivor. And I thought it was important that as the Florida Bar was discussing these issues, that they had someone out there discussing them that had been through the worst of the worst and survived. Now, I was, quote, lucky in that my mental illness came before my legal career, because I learned a lot of coping mechanisms and was able to have that under control before I entered law school and before I started practicing. However, a lot of people suffer with mental illness before they go to law school and before they start practicing, but don't get treatment. I didn't have any choice, right? I was taken by ambulance with almost no life left in me, and so I had to seek treatment. I didn't have a choice. But when people do have a choice, they worry about stigma. They worry about if they start seeing a therapist, especially if they run it through their insurance and there's a record of it, that it's going to come out when they apply for the bar and it's going to be a problem for them. Or if they're seeing a therapist or seeing a psychiatrist during law school and somebody finds out, that's going to be a problem for them professionally. And so a lot of people that seek to enter our profession sort of put off getting treatment and getting help, even when they think they should. And that is a huge problem, right? Because you don't then learn the coping skills. You don't have somebody keeping an eye on you. And when things do get more stressful, as they inevitably do as you progress through law school and your career as a lawyer, then you lose control and people start self-medicating. And that's where the alcoholism comes in a lot. So, we really want to encourage people, and we want to make sure that people understand that getting that kind of treatment is not going to be a barrier to practicing law. I, of course, had my mental health history on my bar application when I moved to Florida and decided to join the bar. And I was fresh out of law school, so I didn't have any other lawyers speaking for me. I was just like all of you, fresh out of law school, applying for the bar. And Florida did not ask a single question. They did not call me in and make me explain myself. They did not hesitate. They admitted me to the bar, and without any question, even though I had that history. I know that there are some people that have had, mine, of course, it had been a while since my suicide attempt, but no time at all since I had been in treatment. I was still in treatment. Some people that have an onset a little bit closer to their law school start or graduation, years ago used to have to come and talk about that a little bit before the Board of Bar Examiners, before being admitted, to make sure that they were handling it and had it under control. I think that happens less now than it used to. I graduated from law school in Georgia. I went to the University of Georgia, and ironically, Georgia wanted me to come and explain myself. When I applied for the bar there, they wanted me to come to Atlanta and stand in front of a room full of lawyers and explain why they should let me be a lawyer after I had graduated from the best state school in their own state at the top of my class. And I told them, no, I was not going to do that. So I did not join the Georgia bar because I thought that was incredibly inappropriate and insulting. So you can see that there are changes in different states. Now, Georgia now has a very robust lawyer mental health program. You know, it's the topic has sort of become popular, and states, all states are sort of getting a little bit better at it, I think, but there are still some differences. But in Florida, I had no problem. It was not an issue. So the question becomes, in general, whether people become mentally unhealthy during law school or during their practice, or whether, you know, it's something that comes before that. And that is really hard to measure because of what I was just talking about, people not getting treatment. So, you know, we have indications that people come into law school healthy and then at some point begin to suffer from mental illness, but it's difficult to discern whether they were just not seeking treatment until it got to the point of being unmanageable. And so, you know, it's hard for us to know the difference. It's important though, because even it doesn't only affect how you feel, it doesn't only affect your enjoyment of your life, but it can affect your ability to practice law, right? You are a better lawyer if you are taking care of yourself, just like you are a better parent, you are a better friend, you are a better spouse, all of those things, if you are taking care of yourself. Also, a lot of the clients that you meet are going to be going through mental health issues themselves, and they actually really feel better talking to somebody who knows what it's like, right? Talking to somebody who's been there, who can empathize with them. And so as much as people talk about hiding these things, I'm upfront with my clients about it. I mean, you can Google me and find out about my mental health history because I do things like this. But, you know, when I meet a client, I tell them, look, I've been through depression. I understand where you are. I understand how hard it is to struggle with these things. I understand that you need to go to therapy, and that, you know, that is part of what you have to do to deal with your life. And it really does actually increase the bond, I think, with clients when they see you as a real person, as a whole person. So, you know, I hope that as we move forward, that the stigma wears off a little bit, and people are more accepting of taking care of their own mental health, and even to the extent of mental illness. There are, of course, different levels of mental health issues, right? We have, you know, your sort of everyday stress all the way up to a severe mental illness. And people think, well, this is just stress, right? Everybody's stressed. I'm a lawyer. I'm busy. You know, I have a family. I have all these things going on. I'm supposed to be stressed. I'm supposed to feel this way. This is just how it is. But just because there's a good reason for it doesn't mean that there's not something you can do about it to make it easier. You know, if you go skiing and fall down and break your leg, then you have a very good reason for your leg hurting, right? Your leg is supposed to hurt. It's broken. You fell down. But that doesn't mean you don't do anything about it. That doesn't mean you just hang out with the pain and wait for it to get better. You still go to the doctor. You still get x-rays. You still find out what has to happen. You put a cast on, you get surgery, you take medicine, whatever it is you have to do, you stay off of your leg. You know, all of those things you do, even though it's appropriate for you to be feeling that pain, you do things to make it better. So the same thing is true with stress, right? Even though it's appropriate for you to feel stressed, that doesn't mean you don't need to and can't do things to make yourself feel better. And it doesn't always have to be, you know, with a medical professional, although I do think that our society needs to move more towards having a mental health checkup the same way we have dental checkups and vision checkups, right? We do those things annually, whether or not we feel like our vision has changed or whether or not our teeth are falling out or anything hurts, right? You go once a year. And I think it's a good practice to have a therapist or a mental health professional, or even just a check-in with your general practitioner on your mental health at least once a year, so that somebody knows your baseline, right? You have some sort of record of this is how this person feels and looks and sounds when they're doing well. And if that changes, there's somebody there to notice. You know, and that's the same way your eye doctor is, or your dentist is, right? Your eye doctor knows what your vision history is. And so if all of a sudden you come in and there's some major change, they say, whoa, you know, we got to look at this, you know, it's the same kind of thing. And so I really think that just as human beings with brains, that having that check-in of your mental health at least every year is a good idea. And, you know, a lot of people will say, you know, say that your mental health issue, your depression, your anxiety, your panic, whatever it is all in your head. And that always makes me laugh because, you know, that's where your brain is. And your brain is your most important organ, right? And so that's something that you have to take care of. So yeah, it is all in my head. And that makes it supremely important. So, you know, and especially as lawyers in profession, I mean, that's what we do, right? We use our brains. We're not manual workers. We're not out here, you know, lifting with our knees instead of our backs, right? We're lifting with our brains. That's what we're using most often. And if your brain is constantly suffering from anxiety or depression or substance abuse or things like that, then it makes your work harder, it makes your life harder, and you can help yourself and help your career by clearing out some of that stress. So what do you do, right? What do we do to sort of make this better? So one of the things that I think is really important is, and I don't get this perception so much from Cooley, so you all might not feel this, but when I was in law school, there was this sort of unspoken rule that you weren't supposed to be friends with opposing counsels, right? And you weren't supposed to be friends with, when you grew up and you were a real lawyer, you weren't going to be friends with people who were on the other side. So if you were a criminal defense attorney, you weren't allowed to be friends with prosecutors. And if you were, you know, a plaintiff's attorney, you weren't supposed to be friends with defense attorneys. There's supposed to be this line, and you were supposed to be, you know, they're on the other side of the line, and also you're not supposed to be friends with judges, and you know, that kind of thing. And that's just not true, right? You're completely allowed to be friends with any other lawyer, regardless of what they practice, regardless if you appear on the other side of them. You're even allowed to be friends with judges. A lot of times your friends will become judges and you don't have to stop being friends with them. We're allowed to socialize with each other and we're allowed to be close to each other. I remember one time I had a hearing, and it was with a friend of mine who I hadn't seen in a while, and I was really excited to be able to see her at this hearing. And I actually wrote at the top of my notepad, "Do not hug," and I put her name, right, to remind myself, because, you know, probably my client wouldn't have loved it if I would have run in the room and been like, oh, you know, to the lawyer on the other side. But that's what I wanted to do because she was my friend and I hadn't seen her in person in a while, and I was excited to see her. But you know what? We both went into that hearing and we made our arguments, and ended up with sort of a split the baby kind of ruling. So nobody really won or lost. But afterwards, we were able to be friends. And if she would have won, then we would have still been friends. And if I would have won, we would have still been friends. It's fine. And we are, I think, really lucky as a profession to have bar activities and voluntary bar associations and sort of these clubs of lawyers that get together. And I think it is crucially important to join those and be active in those and get to know people in those, because you need to have people that understand your line of work and understand the kind of stress you're under. And it's great to have people, again, who know you and know how you are and can sort of be there to notice whether or not, you know, something seems off or something seems wrong. You know, if for example, you know, if I just stopped showing up to my bar committee meetings, if I just stopped showing up to women lawyers events, people are going to notice and they're going to reach out and say, hey, Mandi, everything okay? You know, we haven't seen you in a while. We're used to seeing you. And that's great, right? And I can say, oh yeah, you know, I'm just crazy busy. Things have just been busy. My schedule just hasn't worked out. I've been, you know, missing things. That's fine. Or I might say, you know what? I really have been very depressed lately, or I've been very anxious lately. I haven't felt like being around people. And then maybe that's a bridge to talk to somebody and help you sort of work through those issues, and have a friend who understands what that's like, right? So I really encourage people to be involved in those things. And I know early in your career, you'll feel like you don't have time. You might have, you know, not have your firm might not be willing to pay for your expenses to join those groups or whatever, but find something that you're able to afford, or free events that you're able to go to, and start making friends within the profession. It's really, it's priceless to have those kinds of friends, and to have them support you and to have them be there for you to celebrate when you have, you know, great wins or great successes, and to be there to support you when things are rough. You know, I had a time where I was in just the most miserable job ever. I cried every day going to work, every single day. I dreaded going to this job. It was awful. And I put the word out to my friends, you know, my friends from Hillsborough Women Lawyers Association. I put out the word and I said, hey guys, you know, I need a new job, man. I got to get out of here. This is awful. I can't do this anymore. And within 6 weeks, I had a new job, because of one of my friends. And she knew somebody who was hiring and put in a good word for me and got my resume to them, and they hired me, and I was out. And that next job was really one of the best jobs I've ever had. It was fantastic. And that would never have happened if I was just cold calling places or sending out resumes on my own. Or I don't even think it would have happened with a recruiter. You know, it happened because I had those connections. And you know, when I went out on my own, opened my own firm, which is what I do now. I have my own firm. You know, you had that network of people to send you work. I mean, it's really important. So I just really encourage everybody to, you know, sort of socialize within the profession and make sure that you have, you know, a good network, a good support system, not just in your outside friends and family, but within the profession as well. Another thing I think is really important is to respect each other's humanity, and not just each other's, but your own, and to recognize that we all make mistakes, right? There's nothing that makes me cringe more when I see people criticizing, you know, typos that other people make, because who hasn't made a typo, right? I would like to meet that person, and then they can type everybody's everything for the rest of their lives. I think everybody's made a typo, right? Everybody's made a mistake. And I will tell you that the absolute perfect time to find your mistake in a brief is 30 seconds after you filed it with the court. That is the exact time that you will find it. And I see lawyers are smiling and laughing because it's true. And it's not because we're bad lawyers, right? It's because we're human. We make mistakes. And it is really hard to proofread your own stuff, right? That's just a human fact, because you know what's supposed to be there. Your brain sees it, even if it's wrong. And so if you're a solo practitioner, especially, and you don't have somebody else proofreading your stuff, that's hard. Even when you do have somebody else proofreading your stuff, or sometimes you don't have time for that, or, you know, sometimes they make mistakes too. Everybody makes mistakes. And I have been in front of a lot of judges. You know, I worked for 2 federal court judges. I've been in front of a lot of state court judges, and I have never once had a judge deny a motion that I filed because I misplaced a comma or I had a typo in there somewhere. Now, I have had judges who are, you know, kind of jerky about it and will say, you know, oh, you know, I see that, you know, defendant's motion refers to their client as a he in some paragraphs and a she in other paragraphs, right? I go, oh, man, you know, I didn't catch that, right? Because it's not a misspelling. So Microsoft doesn't catch it, and you've read it 1,000 times, but you didn't notice it, and it's there. But you know what? So what? It happens. Mistakes happen. And so I think we have to be, you know, more forgiving of each other and more forgiving of ourselves, and realize that, you know, you're going to file that thing and it's going to have that error, and, you know, the judge is either going to notice it or they're not, but it's not the end of the world. You know, very few of us practice emergency room law, right? There are people who practice, you know, I think, you know, criminal attorneys and of course death penalty attorneys, they have huge stakes. Family law attorneys do too. You know, you have children involved in everything, but even in those cases, most of the time you can fix a mistake you've made. You can file a corrected something, you can file an amended something if you need to, you can ask for an extension of time if you need more time. Most of the time there's something that can be done, right? You're not going to lose the patient on the table, you know, you're going to have the opportunity to fix it. So, and I think that if you approach your work with a little bit of grace, and you're not so afraid of those mistakes, you actually make less of them, right? If you're not so tensed up and you're not so anxious and you're not so worried all the time, you end up making fewer mistakes because you're taking your time more, you're breathing more, your eyes are a little more open, you're not as tired, you're not as worn out, and you make fewer of them. So I think that's really important. And you know, when I had my first job as a lawyer, my boss was very paranoid about mistakes. And, you know, this is my name on there, and I don't want the judge to think of me as a lawyer who files things with errors in the docket entry or errors in the whatever. You know, he was very paranoid. And I finally said to him, you know what? You'd be surprised how few times the judge actually reads what you write. Not only that, how few times they notice who the lawyer is that did the writing, right? Because that's not what they're making the decision on. First of all, in federal court, it's the clerks that read everything first. Generally, your federal clerks are going to read all of the stuff first. They're going to write up an opinion, and then the judge is going to weigh in. You know, not to say that the judge is never going to read your stuff, but that's not what they're doing. They're not there looking for, you know, who's the lawyer that makes the most typos. Who's the lawyer that, you know, that formatted this incorrectly. You know, that's not the kind of thing that they're looking for. They are busy people, and they're looking for the substantive arguments. And so, you know, like I said, just give yourself a little bit of grace and allow yourself to be human. And really, it will help you to avoid those little tiny mistakes that we end up making. And if they still get through, they still get through. Then one day you'll be on one of these webinars and you'll be smiling and laughing with the other lawyers that were smiling and laughing a few minutes ago, because you'll know that in those 30 seconds, you say, oh, you know, defendants is plural. It's only supposed to be singular. Oh my gosh. And it'll bug you, but it's there, it happens. And you know what? Judges make typos too. I've gone through Westlaw and seen some real doozies in some opinions in Westlaw, and you think, oh my gosh, you know, that's there forever, right? That's all over the place. People don't read our briefs nearly as much as they read judges' opinions, and that's there for good. So, you know, and of course, you want to focus on the big picture, right? When you're practicing, focus on what is your ultimate goal in the case. Like, yeah, maybe you lose a motion here, but does that really destroy your entire case? Is there something you can do to fix that? And is there something that you can learn from this experience next time? Is there something you can learn about the judge? Is there something you can learn about that opposing counsel? All of those things sort of can help you in this profession to feel a little less stressed, I think. The other thing I think is we need to watch out for each other. I talked about voluntary bar events and things like that, and getting to know each other and making friends. And there's that saying from the airport, if you see something, say something. I think it's the same when you're talking about working with other lawyers and also your staff, right? I mean, your paralegals are stressed, your legal assistants are stressed, there's stress all around you. Pay attention to people, see if somebody starts acting differently all of a sudden. And ask people how they're doing. Is there anything you can do to make their job easier? Do they need a break? As how does the work day feel for them? How do they feel coming into work? If you're working with somebody or they're working for you, you don't want them to be crying all the way to work every day. That's not the kind of employee you want. That's not the kind of environment you want to foster, right? So talk to people, ask them how they feel about that environment and what you can do to make it better. And, think about the things that are really important in the work environment and the things that might not be so important. What do we need to be really strict about? And just don't be afraid to offer help and to ask somebody how they're doing. And if you have somebody that you think is suffering and is having a hard is having a hard time sharing, or every time you ask them, they're like, oh, I'm fine, everything's fine, it's fine, oh, how are you? Well, you know what? Maybe you share first. So that seems to be a really good key to getting people to open up. If you say, yeah, I mean, things are okay, but, I've been really stressed. I've been feeling a lot of anxiety. I'm trying to find some way to cope with this better, and once you open up about it, then that person is going to feel more comfortable. And when they're coming at you from a perspective of helping you, like, oh man, I know how you feel, and I don't know, I have a hard time dealing with that myself, or then sometimes you start talking about coping mechanisms, and they get something from you, and you might get something from them, and it just gets people to open up. I give that advice to people who are dealing with loved ones that have really severe mental health issues. I say, if you have somebody in your family that is having a really severe problem and needs to see somebody, you go to therapy first. Get your own therapist, start going to therapy, and then invite them to come with you. Most therapists are okay with you having someone with you at 1 or 2 sessions, right? Someone in your life that's important to you. If you say, look, a lot of my stress is coming from my sister because I'm really worried about her, then your therapist can allow you to bring that person to your therapy. And then it's about you, right? This isn't about they're broken or there's something wrong with them. It's about you. It's about, look, I'm really stressed about our relationship, and I want to make sure that our relationship is good. And sometimes that opens their mind. So, to the extent that you want to be helpful to the people around you, to other law students, to other lawyers, opening up to them is always a really good way to start. And yeah, people enter law school. I just saw this in the chat. People enter law school. Everybody enters law school as, like a type A personality who's used to getting A's all the time. And then you have, an entire room full of A students, and somebody's got to get a B and somebody's got to get a C, and somebody, it has to, especially if there's a curve, right? It has to happen. It's hard, it's stressful. And so, talk about that. I mean, if you're a professor, and you're teaching corporations, you probably think, where do I fit this into a lecture about corporations? Well, you know what? It doesn't necessarily have to fit in, right? You can take a few minutes. When I was teaching, I always, in my very first class, always told everybody about how much more important their mental health was to me than anything that we were doing. And so if my class was causing you stress, I wanted you to tell me. If another class is causing you stress and you think I can be helpful to you in that, let me know. But tell stories about, man, I remember when I got my first B in law school, or I remember getting that one exam that I thought I aced and it just didn't happen. Or for me personally, I had my first civil procedure exam in law school. I had a panic attack at the very beginning of the exam. And there's nothing you can do. You can't leave. You can't get up and walk around. You can't take your Xanax. You can't call a friend, right? You can't do anything. You're stuck. You have to take the exam. And it was very difficult. But I did it and I survived it and I got through it. And, when you graduate from law school, that first job, they do look at your grades. The first job you get out of law school is going to look at your grades. But they're not just going to look at your grades. They're going to look at other things too. And so remind people of that, there's other aspects to your law school experience. And, think about things like, and then really once you get that first job, very few people look at your law school grades after that, right? Once you've got that first job on your resume, very few people go back. They might ask you for your transcript to prove you went to law school, because I don't know if you've heard, but there's been some lawyers in the country who have pretended to have gone to law school that haven't really. So they might ask you for your transcript, but it's usually not because they want to see, that you got a B+ in legal research and writing. If you've been out in the field and you've been practicing, then they assume, you have the experience, you have the ability, you know what you're doing. But it is stressful to go from always being at the top of your game to maybe not being at the top of your game. And so you have to sort of adjust your expectations a little bit, and realize that, that's just how this is created. There has to be somebody who's going to get a B. There has to be somebody who's going to get a C. And you all came in as A students. And some people are going to be better at certain topics. Some people are going to be better at certain methods of test taking, all kinds of things. My mother is a genius. She is brilliant. She's the worst test taker in the history of test takers. All of the tests she ever took in her life, she had complete meltdowns during. And so she had a really hard time in school. I mean, there are some people who just have really hard time with test taking. If that's an issue for you, talk to your professors about that. Sometimes there are things they can do about that, especially now where we have much more ability to accommodate students who have difficulties in certain situations than in the past. So, all of that is out there. And, just keep in mind that being a lawyer is secondary to being a human. No matter what job you take when you get out of law school, if something happens to you, they're going to fill that space. And I'm not saying that you're worthless. I'm not saying that you're useless. And I'm not saying that you don't, you might not be a better fit for that job than the person that takes over for you. But you know what? Nobody's going to fill your space as a parent, as a spouse, as a sister, as a brother, as a friend. Nobody's going to fill those spaces. Those are the spaces where you are most valuable and you are most loved and you are most irreplaceable. And so take care of your best friend's best friend, your child's mother, your spouse's spouse. Take care of that person before you take care of your law firm's associate or even your client's attorney. Because if you're doing that, then you're going to be better at work. And set your boundaries. Boundaries are a huge thing. I could do a whole separate presentation on boundaries, but set your boundaries early. People are very afraid to set their boundaries. I had friends who I'm a stickler for boundaries. So, I wasn't going to be in the office from 7 to 7 every day if I didn't have a reason to be. If there was not something that I needed to do there. And if the law firm I was at was going to fire me because of that, then they were going to fire me because of that. That was just not something I was willing to do. But, you know, I had friends who would jump out of bed at 5 in the morning if the partner called or emailed them. You know, people who answer the phone 24 hours a day. You know, there's even some law firms that advertise, you know, you can talk to a lawyer 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'm sorry, that's just not me. You know, that might be them. That's great for them. They might have enough partners to work out shifts and be able to handle that. But that's not me. I'm not going to do that. And so set those expectations early and stick to them. You know, if you're a person who's going to go out to lunch and, you know, need to go for a walk every day at lunchtime, then you go for a walk every day at lunchtime. And if there's not a good reason for you to skip that walk, if it's just because somebody wants FaceTime, they want you to sit there and hold down your chair, well, to me, that's not a good enough reason to sacrifice your health and well-being. So, you know, really make sure that you think of yourself as a person, you take care of yourself as a person, and you set those boundaries early. And please reach out for help. I mean, all of your professors are there for you right now. I'm not a professor right now, but I'm here for you. Amy can give you my contact information anytime. There are lots of lawyers that would be happy to mentor you and be helpful to you in these arenas. You're welcome to come to hall events, whether you are male or female, law student or lawyer, anytime, and meet people and network and start building your support system now. There's lots of people who care about you as a human being and not just as a law student or lawyer. So find those people, grab onto them, and build those relationships and make sure that you're taking care of yourself. I think this is my time to stop talking and see if we have questions or discussion. So Amy, you want to take over?
Sure. Thank you so much, Mandy, for all of that very important information. We do have a question from Professor DeBose.
As Mandy was talking about anxiety as a student, I have an education background, and that's one of the things that we teach young teachers. Figure out a way to reduce anxiety for your students on exam day. And one of the things that I do is I tell my students, I have midterms this week. One is at 2 and one is at 6. At 1:45, I'm going to start passing out the testing materials, face down. And then at 1:50, we're going to have 5 minutes of quiet time. I don't want you out there fighting on I-4 10 minutes before your exam. And then we're all going to take 10 deep breaths and breathe. You know, but I tell them it's going to be quiet. So if you come in at 5:59, you're going to stand on the wall until I say, turn your exams over. And I tell them about the time I had a complete meltdown in undergraduate school. And I got out of my rhythm of walking to the exam, looking up in the sky, saying a prayer, and taking deep breaths. My fiance convinced me to go out to lunch with him. And he's been my husband now for 45 years. And I remember going to talk to the professor, and I took my transcript and I said, I lost my ability to write during the exam. I couldn't control my hands. And he said, Miss Smith, what did you do differently? And I said, what do you mean? He said, for your transcript to look like this, and for you to have flunked this test, something happened to you. And I remember looking at him and saying, nothing happened. I wasn't sick. He said, you changed the routine, didn't you? And I explained to him what happened. He said, this is a lifelong lesson for you. Do not change what you do in stressful situations. If you need an hour by yourself, allow that. But I had an hour by myself because my dad wouldn't let me move into an apartment. He thought wild girls lived in apartments. So I had to walk across campus. And to this day, I use that when I have a stressful situation coming. I get prepared and I allow myself 10 or 15 minutes to focus and visualize success. And I did that with my classes this past week for the midterm. And but I will, and the professor said to me, I needed the course. I was getting married in the next quarter, and I needed that class to graduate, and I flunked the midterm. And he said, I'll make a deal with you. If you make an A on my final, I'll drop your midterm. He said, because this will be a lifelong lesson for you. I was 20 years old when I learned that lesson, and I use it to this day. And some students don't know, but I had a literal panic attack, and I was afraid of embarrassing myself. I didn't know if I'd be able to walk when I stood up. But I use that with my students, and they look at me and say, I never thought. I used it to take the bar. I got there early. I had quiet time. I had time to breathe, go to the restroom really quickly 3 times so I could get my nerves under control. But that one, I'd never had a panic attack, and I thought I was going to lose the ability to breathe. I was so stressed. I started thinking about my wedding, my credits, and all the things that were at stake. And I felt so foolish when the exam was over. So as professors, as K-12 teachers, you've got to not create more anxiety when there's already a lot of anxiety in the room, and you can do things to bring the temperature down.
Yeah, that's a great idea, and I wonder if your husband has ever lived down that. He's still paying for that lunch all these years later. But yeah, no, that's a great idea. And breathing is something that is one of those things that everybody tells you, and you like know it, like, oh yeah, the breathing techniques. It honestly does work if you really do focus on it and you make yourself do it. And I am the first to admit that I'm guilty of not doing it nearly as much as I should. But when I remember to do it and when I make myself do it, it really does help. It helps with anxiety. It can help with pain. It can help with a lot of things. So that's some really good advice. So thank you so much, Professor. Anybody else?
Mandi, I have a question. I know you're very involved in the Florida Bar's Mental Health and Wellness Committee, and I wonder if they have any resources that are available online or otherwise, maybe for lawyers or law students.
So yes, so we have a lot of resources for lawyers. As far as once you join the Florida Bar, you'll find out that you get Florida Bar benefits, and so the Health and Wellness Mental Health and Wellness Committee has contributed a number of Florida Bar benefits that have to do with mental health and wellness. One of them being that we have a hotline now that lawyers can call. It is completely run by a third party, and it is not connected to any Florida entity at all. And they actually offer three free sessions with a therapist locally for anybody who calls. And so that's a huge benefit. And we have other benefits there too. There's an e-video counselor benefit. There's the Calm app. There's a discount for that. There's quite a few benefits. So that's on our website. For non-members, we also have a lot of on the Florida Bar website, there's a mental health and wellness page. And so there's a lot of resources. There's, things articles that you can read and things that you can download, but there's also CLE videos that, even though you don't need the CLE, they're videos that are provided discussing mental health and wellness issues. And so you can watch those videos and learn a lot there. And then, of course, there's also contact information for all of the members. And so you can always reach out to us if you have questions or issues or things you want to talk about, or if there's resources that you can't find that you would like, we're all very happy to hear from you and discuss these things at any point in time.
Thank you, Mandi. If we have any other questions, attendees are welcome to post their questions in the chat. Oh, I see we do have a question. Our next question is from Nicole.
Hi, Mandi.
Hi.
I have a lawyer friend who recently had thoughts about suicide, and I'm wondering, what is the best way to support a friend who is going through recovery from this? Because I don't want to feel like I'm imposing on her when I say, hey, just checking in to see how you're doing. What are some of the best ways to support a friend who has thought of suicide or attempted suicide?
Well, my first recommendation is to ask her what you can do to support her, what you can do to help her. I think checking in on her is great. I think if you feel that you are a broken record, You know, there are always different ways to check in on somebody. Again, you can dress it up as you needed something. You needed somebody to talk to, you know, or you had a question. I know this sounds silly, but I have the Bitmoji app, and I'll send a Bitmoji every once in a while to the friends I know need to be checked on. And you know, it's just a little like, hey, I'm here, kind of, I'm thinking about you, sort of reminder every once in a while. You know, I think to the extent that you can, I don't know if this is someone local or not, but if they're local and to the extent you can, you know, get out of the house with them or something, that's always helpful. But if they're not local, you know, doing a Zoom every once in a while so you can look them in the eyes and see how they actually are looking, and, you know, making eye contact and things like that, you know, to sort of see, you know, give yourself a measure of how they're doing. But you know, it sounds like this is somebody who had these issues and recognized them and is getting help. So if that's the case, then that's wonderful. And you know, that is, there's, you can't put too much responsibility on yourself either, you know, for somebody else's well-being. And you know, that's sometimes hard. And I always tell people that, you know, when somebody is suicidal, and hopefully your friend is sort of out of that danger zone now, but you know, usually they've made the decision to do it, and they're only contemplating when, where, and how. And so people that think they can talk somebody out of suicide, that's really not possible, right? Like if they're that ill and they're thinking of that, you know, that's not something that's on you to talk them out of. They need to get professional help. And so I'm glad that I saw you sort of nod when I said that she was getting help. So that's a really good thing. And you know, you might want to let her know that you're just proud of her for doing that, too, and that, you know, you're really glad that she's taking care of your friend, because you would be lost without your friend, and you're glad that she's taking care of that person for you as a favor for you, because you want her in your life. So does that help at all?
Yes, those are wonderful suggestions. Thank you.
No problem. No problem.
Okay, I don't think we have any more questions coming in. So if everyone could join me in a big thank you to Mandi for stopping by and talking with us about this very important topic. And Mandi, if you have any contact information or anything you want to share, you're welcome to post that in the chat as well.
I will do that right now. There's my email. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mandi.